Hello and welcome to yet another episode of News in Focus. I'm Miriam Kanyugop. Climate change is already beginning to transform life on Earth as seasons shift, temperatures and sea levels rise. As this happens, the planet is suspected to supply us with air, water and also food for us to be able to live on this earth. Action, if it's not taken drastically, climate change actually will rapidly alter the land and waters depended upon here on for our survival. And this will definitely jeopardize lives for generations to come. Today, we'll look into climate change and its effects. But first, let's watch this clip on the floods that were actually experienced in Narok.
Narok, flash floods wreaking havoc in the town, leaving a trail of destruction. At least 10 vehicles were swept away by the flooding waters. One building collapsed, with the county governor Samuel Tunai saying that this is the worst flooding witnessed in Narok County.
We want to say that it was the worst floods ever which has happened in our county. We have lost property, we have lost life. That some buildings have collapsed, as you have seen, and businesses has been lost. The damage is so big.
According to Isaac Napash, the county ambulance coordinator, the rescue mission was also hampered by the rising water levels.
So currently we are engaged in restoring normalcy in the middle of the town, and we are also tracing vehicles downstream that were taken by the floods. We fear we may get a few other bodies downstream, but we will be able to brief you as the rescue teams continue.
The Kenya Red Cross has sent a team from Nairobi to offer support in the search and rescue.
But it's challenging actually, because people are overwhelmed and maji imekuwa mingi, but we can't exactly tell what has happened by now. Kwa sababu we have seen some vehicles have been carried away. We can't tell what is inside. But we are trying. What we are doing right now, we are trying to move people from the very unsafe ground, maybe to relocate them in the safer grounds. That is what we are doing. Unfortunately, we are also limited because we also worry about the water. Yeah.
This issue of perennial flooding, as you have seen happening in other parts of country like Budalangi and other parts of the country, is really more of a national function. So we are supposed to work with the two levels of government to see to it that this problem is finished once and for all.
Residents were stranded and movement restricted as flooding waters swept through the town.
Let's not take advantage of the floods. These floods have been there for years, and people should not be blaming the county government for the floods. Let's try and come and unite together, assist the people of Narok County, because this county is bigger than any individual, any political divide that we have in this county.
Residents counting losses.
Hasara ndio tumeenda mingi kila mahali, duka zote hizi zote, millions and millions of money have been destroyed. Hasara hata ile imeenda more than $1 million shillings.
Restoration and recovery efforts are still underway, although they have been affected by the heavy rains still pounding the area. Environmentalists link the tragedy on the relentless cutting.
Well, welcome back. After watching that clip, we can actually see the floods here with us, and they are attributed to climate change. We are going to look at some of these climate change effects in the country, and joining me to discuss on these matters is Mr. Jonathan Muriuki, County Representative ICRAF, or better known as World Agroforestry Center. Welcome.
Good evening, viewers.
Okay, so before we continue, let me just bring the issue of climate change. Maybe you could bring it out so that we have it out in the open. It's not just a term, but we've been hearing it, because someone might just keep on just hearing it without knowing exactly what it means. Tell us, what is climate change, and where we are, especially with it in Kenya.
Well, thank you. I think you cannot define climate change unless you start by beginning to define climate itself. Now, climate is the cycle of weather patterns that happen in a geographical area for a period of about a generation, which is 35 to 40 years. And usually this cycle normally changes after about 40 years. So what we are experiencing now is a change of what has been expected by this generation. The rains are going to start at this time. There is going to be some dry season at this time. So this time we are seeing shifts of seasons, and we're also seeing like what we call extreme events, either very dry seasons or floods that we are seeing now, as we are seeing in the clip now.
Okay, we've always been told that, remember in those days where a lot has been said in regards to planting trees. I would like to go into the effect of, what is the effect of planting trees in regards, or what's the relationship between planting trees and climate change? Maybe you could elaborate on that first.
Well, trees have got several ways in which you can say they are related to climate or climate change. First of all is that trees are the ones that regulate the temperatures that we have in the environment, so to speak, because trees take in carbon dioxide, which is one of what we call greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide makes a mass up in the skies that makes the rays from the sun that have been deflected from the ground not to go back to the sun, and that means that we are going to get more and more warming. So carbon dioxide is one of 4 such gases, but it's the biggest component. Usually when there are more trees, they take in carbon dioxide and make carbohydrates, and therefore they reduce carbon dioxide, which again we call greenhouse gases. In that case, then trees reduce what is causing all these changes in the environment. But also on the other hand, trees hold a lot of soil. So what we are seeing in terms of flooding, if we had more trees, we'd be seeing less water coming through, because most of the water will be infiltrating through the tree system. There are many other ways, but those are the major ones that we could say for now.
I'm looking at the angle of I'm a farmer.
Yes.
And I would like to have my land for farming.
Yeah.
So I'm left between choosing whether to plant trees for the sake of my future and planting food. What can you actually say probably the government should come in and do, or what farmers should also do, because most of them are in small-scale farming?
Thanks, Miriam. I think there's a mistaken belief, not only by farmers, but also by scientists in various fields, that having trees in the farm necessarily compromises crop production. We've been able to do research, and we are seeing that quite a number of trees actually improve crop production. So it depends on what trees have been planted in the farm, and it is good for farmers to go back to what are the indigenous species in their lands, because most of these species are very much used to the kind of environment they go through, and also to interacting with the components in the farm. So a wise selection of tree species means that you can actually have your trees in the farm, but also have even more crop production than you're experiencing without trees.
What are these trees that you're talking about in regards to if I wanted to do my farming, and at the same time, because most farmers argue that there are some trees, if I put them in my farm, then my food will not produce. What are some of these trees?
Farmers are used to trees, when we talk about tree planting, to what we call exotic trees. These are species that have been introduced from other parts of the world. They are extensively bred, or they have been done scientific breeding and reproduction to make sure that they are only good for fast growth. Now, fast growth means that they are going to be taking up more nutrients from the soil, more water from the soil, and become competitive to the crops. And therefore, if you're only planting exotic species such as eucalyptus, yes, it's going to be a lot of competition. However, there are other indigenous species, like I would give an example of one tree that's planted a lot in Western Kenya. We call it Macamia rutea. Farmers have got knowledge about it. If you plant it in your farms, then you find there is no competition with trees. Another common species that farmers are planting, it's exotic from Australia also, but it's good, is the Gravelia robusta, very common around Mount Kenya communities. It does not compete extensively with crops.
Okay. What about the issue of coming up with that plantation of trees that produce fruits? In regards to like avocado trees, the guava trees, what about such? Do they also compete with food, or?
Yes, they do compete with food because they have a massive crown, or what we call the mass of leaves that we call the canopy of the tree. So such trees as mangoes and avocados have got a massive crown, and therefore all that you see is actually nutrients that are converting into that massive crown. But we tell farmers, you can plant these trees and you can actually manage them to make sure that they do not compete with crops. I'll give an example of mango, for example, a very wonderful fruit that we all enjoy. When you plant mangoes, they are attacked by what we call mango weevils. Usually you manage mango weevils by pruning the tree. So when you prune the tree, you produce it in a funnel shape, a lot of opening, and the air is able to flow. You get a double win in that you're able to get good fruits, which are marketable, you get income for yourself, and you also minimize the competition with crops because more light comes below ground.
Tell us the balance in the ecosystem of the trees, the carbon and the oxygen. Tell us the balance and why we need to have more trees now that they emit carbon dioxide and we emit, they emit oxygen, like you said, and we also emit carbon dioxide. So how does it work in regards to balancing the whole equation in the ecosystem?
Carbon dioxide is one among the gases that form what we call the atmospheric gases. The biggest proportion is nitrogen, followed by oxygen, and carbon dioxide is about 0.03% of the atmosphere. So if you maintain it at around that figure, there should be no problem with carbon dioxide. But when it starts rising because we are emitting it from factories and everywhere, this keeps blocking the rays of the sun that have been reflected from the ground, and therefore we get more and more heating. So if we keep it around 0.03%, it should not be a problem. It doesn't mean that carbon dioxide does not have to be there at all. Now, but what is happening is that within this generation that we now have, you have a lot of gases coming from not just factories, but also the automobiles that we are driving, and also the planes that are flying all over. So it's really a lot right now. We cannot do without production. What we need to ask ourselves is that where are all these gases going into? And usually, the more the trees can be planted in lands that are not being managed right now, and the trees do not have to be planted, actually, you can manage what we call farmer-managed natural regeneration, or enclosures that can allow trees to regenerate by themselves. And therefore, we can take most of this carbon back to where it should be in the plant.
Okay. Let me go back again to farming, but now this is not really farming in terms of just crop farming, but there are farmers who believe in charcoal, selling charcoal. And they have that argument that I'm still taking care of my family. So this is my livelihood, cutting trees and doing the charcoal business. So the question is, how do you get to talk to such a person that there's a cycle? Maybe you can talk about the cycle of, yes, you cut the trees, then you get to make the charcoal, but what are the effects after that to this person? Having that in mind, they are thinking of their livelihood.
Well, in terms of charcoal productions, there are two ways to look at that. First is the fact, yes, it's a livelihood to the farmer. So a farmer can actually produce charcoal and plant more trees to replace. That means for every carbon you're taking out into the atmosphere, you're getting it back through these trees planted. But what we are seeing also is that there are very poor carbon charcoal production methods that are making all the charcoal that is actually produced just go down to waste. And therefore, you're getting a lot of carbon out of the forest or out of the trees, and you get very little back. So even with a few trees that farmers can cut, there can be better kiln production procedures that make more charcoal that is more utilizable without having to cut so many trees. So there is the bit of trying to balance the trees that are cut and the trees that are planted, but also producing more efficiently than we are seeing right now.
How can we balance? Do I cut one tree, plant 2 or 3 or 5, or do I do one by one? I cut one and plant
one. 30-year-old tree is not exactly equal to one seedling, and therefore we're looking at what kind of biomass. So if the farmers were going to do what we call eco-charcoal production, it means that there should be a cycle in which trees are planted every time and they keep growing, so that the trees that are replaced are actually being replanted. But you do not have only the big trees cut and then you've got the small seedlings. There should be what we call like growth. You know, just like human beings, you've got small children, you've got teenagers, you've got young adults, and you've got those that are about to die. So even the trees need to be managed like this.
Okay, would you say it's an ignorant mind when I bring this aspect whereby you have someone saying rains will always be there because you were born and you found rains there, and you'll always have issues of droughts here and there, but rains still come. And there's also that question of don't worry, we'll still have the winds coming in, and also we'll always have the rivers flowing. Is it just natural? They'll always be there, or climate change can actually deplete this with time in years, as we say?
Rains will always be there. The question is, are rains always good? And the clip in Narok will tell you, rains are not always good. But is it the rains that are bad? No, it's not the rains that are bad. It is our water management system that is really bad. So we are going to have rains come, we're going to have rains go, we're going to have drought periods. What is needed is a system of water management that makes sure that water can be harvested when it comes in torrents, and it is utilized when it is not there. And that we can no longer just depend on natural production systems, what we call rain-fed systems. We must have a human intervention that makes sure that water is utilized when it's actually needed to be utilized.
Okay. Now, the thing is now, that's the question, the last statement.
Yeah.
We utilize water when it needs to be utilized.
Yeah.
How many people know this? And maybe you can talk about it so that most of these people who don't know when and how and when and where,
Yeah.
so that they can be able to know that. How do you go about it?
There are two things to look at that. And the point is how the water comes and how the water flows. So we are seeing a lot of water coming, falling over the roofs, and then finding its way through what we call sheet erosion into the rivers and flowing all at the same time. Now, there are various ways which we call water catchment, rainwater harvesting, which farmers can utilize. First of all, it can be utilized as tanks that can be utilized around households, but also can be utilized as what we call small ponds that farmers can utilize among themselves. But even that said, there is need to increase infiltration when the rains come because of having many trees removed, and therefore most of the land is bare. Most of the water that comes, it does not go into the soil as should happen, but it actually goes to the rivers, and that is lost water. So you can do damming in the rivers, but there are also very simple ways in which water can be collected right on site where it comes, and it is utilized by the farmer. You said right, not many farmers know this, but this is because we are coming from the argument that rains will always be there and they will always be utilized. So that's why we have to change our mindset from the farmer to the policymaker.
So what you're saying is that yes, rains will be there, but we also need to manage so that the natural system remains as natural as it was, not where we have rain and it becomes havoc, as you're saying there.
As much as possible, yes. We got to say, I mean, natural systems are changing. Climate change was going to happen even if human beings did nothing. So the point is, what equilibrium can we find now in the current shift of temperatures, in the current shift of rainfall? But every farmer needs to say, I need a crop for every drop that comes. Do as much as possible to organize that every water that falls on your land, well, it's not very much possible that nothing goes, but most of the water that falls on your land is actually utilized for production, either because it went into the land and was utilized by the crop that is there right now, or it was stored somewhere in a water pan or in something else, and it will be utilized at a time when the rains are not coming.
Now, let me take us through an exit from Kenya a little bit. Reason being, someone might be saying, okay, maybe this is only happening here. And you can have some life maybe in Tanzania or Uganda. Is it also happening in other countries? Are we still seeing climate change effects in other countries?
Climate change is global. If you look at countries beyond the equator, temperate countries that experience 4 seasons, that is the winter, autumn, spring, and summer, they are seeing a lot of extreme events right now. So the temperatures are very hot in summer. You're seeing wildfires in the forest because of very extreme temperatures that make the plants in the forest to literally lose water. They're also seeing floods, and they're also seeing a lot of glacier and snow coming when it is winter. So even there, it is no longer normal, and it's happening everywhere. So it's not just a Kenya situation that can be said to be site-specific, but it is happening everywhere, and there are predictions showing what is going to happen in just about every part of the world.
You mentioned wildfires. How do they start? Because someone might think maybe the forests are dry, so someone just passes there and sparks some light or something. But I wanted to understand why the wildfires come to be associated with climate change. How is that?
Well, think of a very hot time in this place, in this our continent, and look at the forest and just look at the leaves of the trees, how they are. They are pretty much what we call desiccated, and they have lost all the water in the leaves. So what you need is just a spark anywhere to happen. Temperatures are very high in summer, beyond 40 degrees centigrade, and any spark is just enough to cause a fire. Wildfires happen in the forest just about every time, and they are controlled. When it is too hot, it becomes very difficult to control wildfires. So states and governments have to utilize a lot of resources to try to do aerial control of fire or various other ways, but it becomes a big, big disaster because it is like fuel is ready to be burned.
Okay, I wanted us to discuss about those effects that have been seen here, apart from the floods in Kenya, because we had in Nyandarua, we had the snow that came in, something that had never been seen before. We'll talk about that when we come after the short break. We are glad you're watching. Do be here with us when we come back and we get to understand more on how you can actually make a difference and make sure that climate change does not really affect you, and mostly negatively.